Hello. Earlier in the creation of videos for the Axelos PRINCE2 Agile Foundation Certificate Credential Training, gosh that's a nice mouthful, there was a slide, it starts off looking like this, that I said in I think module 1 or 2. I'll come back and I'll do a bonus video on that, but I'm not going to do it in line at the moment because it would take longer than I wanted to spend at that time talking about how the bits and pieces of Prince, PMBOK and Agile fit together. And it is my thought that if we're in a real world environment, then what we actually need is the ability to talk to our customers and supply chain, etc. in the projects world using the vocabulary that they might be using, or at least understanding the vocabulary that they use. And that means we're pretty unlikely to be in a pure Prince2 Agile environment. We're likely to hear other phrasings and other vocabulary. So I want to take you through this diagram here. I expect it will take 15 minutes or so. There's a lot of content in here and there's a lot in the notes section. First thing I want to say is that we've got some color coding down the bottom here, and I did say all my diagrams use this. What we need to consider when we're in a projects environment is that we start with a consideration of what's the business pressure or business opportunity. So that's about strategy or tactics to respond to the marketplace, and I'm going to represent strategy, benefits, business think in grey. And what we have to do at the beginning of project planning, whether that is reactive agile planning to a sprint and release mechanism, or whether it's predictive type planning, we need to think about how we turn that strategy and benefits thinking into deliverables or project outputs, where an output is either a product or a service. And I'm going to express those outputs in blue in the diagrams, and they're there in order to generate benefits or impacts for us, and they in my diagrams, not this one because there aren't any impacts, but they will be purple because they are the overlap of a product and the actions required to deliver it, either deliver the product or deliver the outcome from the use of the product or output. Red then is going to be about activity, and the heart of all project activity is concern for quality or fitness for purpose and conformance to specification. Two quite different definitions of quality. I won't disappear off into that rabbit hole right now. And that quality focus is there so we can tell the progress that we've made and so that we deliver what the customer wants. And measuring progress is always about achievement and always done through quality. There is no other way to do it. And that's our control mechanisms, and control at highest level is governance. So green will be control and governance here, and I guess I should have circled each of the three large circles, or outlined each of the three large circles in this picture with green, because the whole picture is about the control structures that we should have in place. Now, when we start a Prince project off, we understand that Prince project, which is a set of steps, so there's my little steps icon, that's a set of steps that are triggered by a thing called a mandate. Better explain that in a second. And that is the territory of the project executive. So here's the executive. Now they have a pure business thinking head. So that's as strategic and as business and as benefit driven as it can be. And they have to have a understanding of how to express that in terms of outcome or result that they're looking for from the project, and they're going to have to take that forwards after the project to generate the benefits, because the project manager will have left by then if we follow the commonest definition of project manager. Although we should recognise that the PMBOK version 6 has said to us project manager's role is perhaps a little unnaturally constrained historically and should extend both before and after the project with more preparation and more follow through afterwards. Now, the construction of a mandate has to be largely business thinking, and it has to rapidly come to an expression of what the project will have delivered at the end, and that is in most vocabularies called acceptance criteria, although Agile may call it conditions of acceptance or definition of done. And Prince starts by saying, well, what happens is people roll up with expectations, CQE, customer quality expectations. And the great challenge in going from expectations to acceptance criteria is we go from an unprioritized, potentially contradictory, unrealistic list of expectations through to an agreed and prioritized list of tests that, when shown to be met, means the supplier has met their obligation. So we're going in a PRINCE2 Agile environment to think through the translation from a business need through to what needs to be delivered with what element of condition of satisfaction or definition of done, which is that quality dimension. And we need to recognize here that there is a business case risk. As a business owner, I am investing time, effort and money, and that time, effort and money in project cost terms is pretty close to guaranteed, and what I hope is that I'm going to get a return afterwards that's bigger than my investment. But I have a risk here. Should I adopt this strategy or some other strategy? And in adopting this strategy, have we got a team that's equal to delivering an output, and then have I got a business that's equal to turning that output into an outcome, and that outcome generating benefits that made all my efforts worthwhile? Now, the PMBOK doesn't really cover this because it says that 4.1, which is produce charter, has as an input either a customer coming along with some sort of agreement contract, or it has the business providing us with a business case. And Prince is saying, well, actually we need to have thought about that a bit more than perhaps the PMBOK does. And a number of Agile frameworks, like SAFe, for example, say, yeah, you definitely got to have thought this business stuff through. But some of the ones like Scrum, probably one of the better known ones, says, no, this stuff isn't something we worry about because we're the team that's constantly there churning out results, and it's the product owner who worries about that sort of stuff, and we're not really going to say very much about it. So Prince puts together this idea that there's something that triggers the project, and you need an executive to do that, and the executive needs a project manager alongside them. If you've done module 6, 7 or 8, you'll see my explanation of these icons. So there's the project manager juggling the hot potato tasks and being slightly business oriented but being very product delivery focused. And the conversation moves on from the mandate by ensuring that that element of the business that's the user community is able to define its targets in terms of the project product description, to use the Prince phrase, or the epics, to use the Agile phrase, or the work breakdown structure, to use the PMBOK phrase, or the product breakdown structure, create PBS there, created as a result of using this technique here, product-based planning. Now, product-based planning is Prince's name for what Agile describes as have a view of where you're going and break that down into a product backlog. So all three of Prince, PMBOK and Agile are talking about using the concept of decomposition to go from a vision of the end point back to a major impacts that we've delivered in the business, back to what it is that we need to have delivered as products or outputs from a project, back to what are the component parts of that, and eventually we arrive at the most atomic, smallest thing that the project can either create or acquire. And that's planning backwards, right to left planning. You may just have heard of the phrase backcasting as opposed to forecast planning. So we're decomposing the project's endpoint as expressed in the mandate, or in PMBOK terms, the charter, or in Agile terms, the vision. We're decomposing that back to the lowest level of configuration items that the project team has to create. And we're doing that by mapping to our quality management approach. So we're doing quality planning, which means that for acceptance criteria or conditions of satisfaction, we're understanding explicitly the tests that need to be passed. And that in many circumstances is by mapping to well-known standards. So the DIN standards in Germany, or the ISO standards across Europe, or the British standards within the UK, although most British standards are, after they're written, get adopted by ISO and get an ISO number, as do others. In Japan there's another set of standards. So very commonly we map the deliverable expression in what Prince calls a product description to a well-known standard. So if I'm going to build a house, I have to lay drains. When I lay drains, there will be a building code wherever you are in the world that says what the rate of fall is to ensure that the water runs through that drain and we don't get muck building up in the drains and blocking them. And that building code will be the conditions of satisfaction or the acceptance criteria that are required. And we can see that either in a work breakdown structure dictionary, PMBOK terminology, or a product description, Prince terminology, or the definition of done, or a component of the definition of done, Agile terminology. Because definition of done in Agile would include everything, right, like training. It's the whole holistic thing in order that the product can be usable, not just the project can say it delivered it. And within that context, in a Prince environment, we want to say that we understand what the benefits and the risks are. And the totality of this lot would be the project initiation documentation. The PMBOK would call it a PMP, a project management plan. Now, from product-based planning's creation of the product breakdown structure, or from PMBOK creation of the work breakdown structure, or from Agile examination of the product backlog and the first half of the sprint planning meeting, when we have conversation with the product owner who says, what I would like delivered are these elements, can we fit that into the next sprint? In all three cases, our subject matter experts have to say, well, in order to create or acquire that, these are the actions that are required. So now we've gone from blue to red. Now we've gone, this product can be either made or acquired as a result of these activities. So PMBOK, it's process 6.1 and 6.2, activities and their interdependencies. Agile, it's the second half of the sprint planning meeting, team discussing who they need to go and talk to gather detailed requirements and what actions they need to take to either build or acquire those components. And Prince, it's moving from the product breakdown structure to the product flow diagram. And what we do is we end up there with a view of the tasks that the team need to perform in order to meet the quality criteria, and the sequence that those tasks needs to be in, where there is a hard logical requirement for a sequence of tasks. For example, you can't hang the engine on the wing of an aeroplane if you haven't built the wings. You can't put the roof on a house if you haven't built the walls, and you wouldn't want to do the foundations if you didn't have planning permission. So we get to a position in all of the different frameworks, independently of what their vocabulary is, where we have a list of activities. Some of those activities are about building the product, just raw bricklaying type stuff, and some of those activities are about confirming quality. So if you lay a brick, you put a spirit level on the top of it and you tap it around so that you don't get it at this angle or this angle, but it's level. So in all cases, whether we're doing this on a 2-week basis or the next 10 years basis, we have turned the business need into a set of activities where those activities have a focus on quality. And then we need to understand the resources. So I'm on the right hand side of the diagram here. We then need to understand the resources that have that skill set, and at this point we're able to start estimating the amount of work to be done, the amount of resource to be consumed, both in terms of materials but also in terms of people. And if we know the size of our team, then we'll be able to determine duration. Now in Agile terms, we say we'll estimate the work to be done in a unit that has no correlation to either the calendar or anything else, and then we'll start doing some work and we'll be able to benchmark the size of our unit to how long it takes us as a team to deliver, and that way empirically we can evolve a reliable rate of progress, which we'll call velocity. PMBOK and Prince say, yes, you can do that. Why don't you just use the last project that you worked on and the one before that and the one before that, and if you keep a good database of how long it took to do similar tasks, you'll be able to estimate with a reasonable, there's a long conversation in what reasonable means, but you'll be able to estimate with some sort of reasonable degree of uncertainty or reasonable precision. So there might be some divergence around how the different approaches consider we get reliable estimating, but they all say something along the lines of, once we understand the activities and the skill sets and the number of people with those skill sets and the amount of resources, we can get some durations. And if we combine duration with dependency, then we can get some view about what this looks like in relation to the calendar, which we could then call a schedule. And in some environments we might then model that with a critical path analysis using things like a Gantt chart. In other environments we might not use those tools. We might instead use something like a Kanban board and use a pull-based mechanism which says we'll schedule things from when the last step has capacity. The step before says, hey, I've got capacity now, and says that to the step before it, and so on until we get to the start step. And the very first step can now start doing a fresh piece of work which will run down through the set of steps as things go. So our project manager now has moved from having a less business and product thinking mode to much more of a task thinking mode, and we have our team leaders and our subject matter experts in here and various other sorts of support folk around, including our supplier. The icon here I'll explain in that other video, go find it. And that brings us to a position where we can say if you combine these things together you get the project baseline. Now the project baseline in an agile environment is a vision of where we want to go, a backlog of things that we'll do as and when we get the time, and the stuff we're going to do in the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks. A Prince baseline will be the stuff we're going to do in the next stage, and a stage wouldn't normally be 2 weeks, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be. A stage might more often be 12 weeks, but it could be 200 weeks if that was appropriate to your environment. And PMBOK will say, well, this is the next cycle of our rolling wave or continuous elaboration approach, but we have a view of what's scheduled to be done over what time frame by what people at what cost, and that establishes for us either our burn down chart or our earned value. Now it's a bit of a cheat really, I've put it at the bottom here, but all the way through we should have been thinking about risk. We started with strategic risk, which was risk to the investor by selecting this project, but we also have tactical risk, which is risk related to the performance baseline about, well, what could go wrong in terms of accelerating or screwing up our expected expenditure or expected timescales. And that might mean that we have to go back and review tasks red, or products blue, or even objective black. On the assumption that having gone back and rethought whether the product is right for the marketplace, or the objective is right for the marketplace, the products are right for delivering that capability. Remember the phrase I used earlier, which was desirable, viable, and achievable. Achievable, will it generate the benefits? Desirable, do I want it? Viable, can I build it? Assuming that all those things are adjusted by recycling for risk, I'm now ready to execute. And executing means go off and do the work. And the only way you can tell if you've made progress is by measuring the conditions of satisfaction, the acceptance criteria. And when you do that, you know what the budgeted cost of the work you have actually performed is, and you get the BCWP, otherwise known as the earned value, and you compare that earned value with the BCWS, or the budgeted cost of the work you had scheduled to do by now, and the actual cost of the work you'd expected by now, and that is perfectly a burn chart, either burn up or burn down, if you want to use agile vocabulary, or its earned value and earned schedule if you want to use other vocabularies. And that you need to pass into whatever your progress reporting mechanisms are, which in agile terms will be stick it on the board, the big visible chart. In Prince terms would be put it into an A11 highlight report, and in PMBOK terms would be refer it upwards. They don't give us the mechanism, but refer it upwards to whoever the appropriate decision makers are. And here again is our project manager, having created the progress report, sending that up at whatever level, and I should maybe have color coded that a little bit, but certainly by the time it gets to the top, what we're thinking here is expenditure versus baseline and benefits profile. So there's a description of how we do planning at whatever time frame, whether it's a sprint or 10 years worth of building an ocean-going liner. Not that an ocean-going liner takes 10 years to build, maybe 3 years to build an ocean-going liner, maybe 10 years to build an advanced warship. But that's the mechanism that we use there. So, plenty in the notes, but I said I'd do that one, and there it is. I hope you enjoy it.